You've booked the flights, you've paid for the hotel, you've found the passports, including that one that somebody had put somewhere safe, which is family language for we'll never see that again. The children have already chosen which inflatable animal they're going to argue over for the entire week. And then somebody asks, have you actually got permission? Because taking your child abroad after separation isn't always as simple as booking a holiday, finding the passports and discovering that airport parking now costs roughly the same as your car in the first place. Get this wrong and you could lose thousands of pounds, breach a court order, or in the most serious circumstances potentially commit a criminal offence. But don't panic. In this video I'll explain when you need permission, when a child arrangements order might allow you to travel, what information you should provide, what documents you should carry, and what happens when the other parent says no. I'm Neil Andrews, a Mackenzie friend, and this is Family Court Explained. This video contains general information about family law in England and Wales. Every family's circumstances are different, and this isn't legal advice about your individual situation. The people and events used throughout are fictionalised scenarios created to explain how the law may operate. Let's meet Sophie. Sophie is 8 years old. She lives mainly with Mum and spends alternate weekends and part of the school holidays with Dad. Mum wants to take Sophie to Spain for 7 nights during the summer holiday. Lovely. The flights are booked. The hotel has a children's pool, and Sophie has announced that she'll be fluent in Spanish by the time she comes home. She currently knows hola. Mum sends Dad a message. Mum: hi, I've booked Spain from the 4th to the 11th of August. Are you happy for Sophie to travel with me? Dad: send me the details and I'll have a look. Before Dad answers, we need to establish whether Mum actually requires his permission. And the starting point is this. Ordinarily, you need permission from everyone with parental responsibility before taking a child abroad. We'll work through that flowchart as Sophie's holiday develops. Question 1. Who has parental responsibility? Parental responsibility means the legal rights, duties, powers and responsibilities a person has concerning a child. A child's birth mother ordinarily has parental responsibility automatically. Whether the father or another parent has parental responsibility may depend upon matters including marriage, civil partnership, birth registration, or an agreement or a court order. In Sophie's family, Mum and Dad both have parental responsibility. Mum therefore shouldn't simply assume she lives with me so I can take her whenever I like. The fact that a child lives mainly with one parent doesn't automatically give that parent unrestricted authority to remove the child from the United Kingdom. And notice those words, the United Kingdom. This isn't about permanent relocation to Australia or disappearing to a cabin in the mountains, although personally I'd begin asking questions around the cabin stage. A 7-night overseas holiday still involves taking the child outside the UK. Now let's briefly change the scenario. Suppose Mum is the only person with parental responsibility. In principle, she won't require consent from somebody who doesn't hold parental responsibility merely because that person is the biological parent. But don't turn that into, only I have parental responsibility, therefore no rule can ever stop me. There may still be a child arrangements order, a prohibited steps order, wardship, local authority involvement, passport restrictions, or another legal order affecting travel. Sole parental responsibility doesn't override a court order. So check the entire legal position rather than relying on just one fact. What counts as permission? Returning to Sophie, Mum and Dad both have parental responsibility. Dad now responds. Spain sounds fine. Send me the flight times, where you're staying and an emergency contact number. Mum: of course, I'll send everything tonight. In a straightforward situation, Dad's clear written agreement may resolve the permission issue. But don't rely solely on a conversation which everybody might remember differently later. Mum: you agreed to the holiday. Dad: I said it should be fine. Mum: exactly. Dad: no, I said should. Welcome to Exhibit A. 2 adults arguing about the legal significance of the word should. Get the consent clearly recorded. Get it clearly recorded in writing, ideally. An email may be sufficient. A clear message may be sufficient. For more complicated travel, particularly where surnames differ, consider using a proper consent letter. Government guidance says a permission letter is usually enough to demonstrate consent. It should include the consenting person's contact information and details about the trip. A useful letter might include Sophie's full name and date of birth, Mum's full name, Dad's full name and contact details, the destination, the departure and return dates, accommodation, travel details, who else is travelling, emergency contact information, Dad's signature and the date it was signed. The consent needs to identify what has actually been agreed. A message saying, "Yeah, whatever," isn't necessarily the gold standard of international travel documentation. Now, let's introduce something that could alter the answer. Mum has a child arrangements order. The order says Sophie lives with Mum and spends specified time with Dad. Under Section 13 of the Children Act 1989, a person named in a child arrangements order as someone with whom the child is to live can ordinarily take the child outside the UK for a period of less than 1 month. That's unless another part of the order prevents the trip. The gov.uk public guidance describes this as up to 28 days, while the statutory wording is less than 1 month. For practical purposes, don't book a trip that sits on the outer boundary and prepare to conduct a mathematical debate at the airport. Keep the journey clearly within the permitted period or obtain express written agreement. And check the wording of your order carefully. Don't just look at the title. Read the operative paragraphs and check for a prohibited steps order, a requirement to obtain consent, a restriction on particular countries, passport arrangements, or any other direction affecting travel. Some people look at parts of the order, but an order needs to be understood in terms of the whole document. The important provision is rarely printed in neon with a flashing arrow saying, "Please read this bit before booking Tenerife." The exception applies to a person named in the order as someone with whom the child is to live. It doesn't automatically give the same permission to a person named only as somebody with whom the child spends time. That distinction catches people out. A regular contact arrangement, even one involving substantial overnight care, isn't automatically the same as being named in the order as someone with whom the child is to live. Mum now thinks the problem is solved. She has a lives with child arrangements order. The holiday is only 7 nights, so she says, "Great, Dad can't object." Not so fast. The holiday overlaps with Dad's ordered weekend. The ability to take Sophie abroad doesn't automatically erase the rest of the child arrangements order. The order still regulates when Sophie spends time with Dad. Mum needs to consider whether the order already divides the school holidays, whose allocated trip the time falls within, whether the holiday removes Dad's ordered time, whether the order requires advance notification, and whether replacement time should be proposed. A reasonable message might look like this. "I've noticed the holiday overlaps with your weekend on the 8th and 9th. I can offer you the weekend before we travel and an additional overnight after Sophie returns." Dad: "That works. Please send me the revised dates." Replacement time isn't an automatic universal legal requirement in every situation, but you shouldn't treat an existing order as though finding a good package holiday has magically made it disappear. Court orders don't vanish because somebody found a hotel with free ice cream. Here's the practical advice. Ask before spending thousands of pounds. Provide enough information for the other parent to make an informed decision. That will normally include the dates, the destination, travel arrangements, accommodation, who else is travelling, contact information, any proposal concerning affected parenting time. You don't need to provide a minute-by-minute itinerary. Nobody needs a notification every time Sophie returns to the breakfast buffet. But this isn't enough either. We're going abroad somewhere in August. Thank you for that comprehensive risk assessment. What if Dad ignores a request? Mum sends the information. Dad reads it. 2 blue ticks appear. And then silence. 3 days pass. Then 5. Then 10. Dad finds time to post photographs of a Sunday roast, but apparently can't answer whether Sophie can leave the country. No response isn't automatically consent. Unless Mum has another lawful basis for travelling, she shouldn't simply treat silence as permission. Her follow-up should be clear, calmed and time-limited. Please confirm by Friday whether you consent to the proposed holiday. If you have any concerns, please identify them so that I can try to address them. Keep the communication focused on the trip and on Sophie. Don't attach the complete history of the relationship. Also, while we're discussing communication, in November 2018 you said, "No. 1 dispute at a time." What if Dad says no? Dad eventually replies, "No, I don't consent." Mum, "Can you explain what your concerns are?" Dad, "I'm worried that you won't bring Sophie back." Dad saying no doesn't automatically mean the holiday is cancelled, but Mum needs to understand the nature of his objection. There's a substantial difference between "I'm refusing because I don't like you" and "I have evidence that you're planning not to return." The court's focus will be Sophie's welfare. Relevant issues could include the purpose and length of the trip, the destination, travel and accommodation arrangements, any history of retaining or withholding Sophie, Mum's connections with the destination, her continuing ties to England and Wales, the clarity of the return plan, school attendance, safeguarding, Sophie's wishes and feelings where appropriate, the effect upon Dad's relationship with Sophie, and whether practical safeguards can reduce any identified risk. A 7-night trip to Spain with return flights and full accommodation details is very different from an open-ended journey with a one-way ticket and no meaningful explanation. The country involved can matter, but the court looks at the complete circumstances rather than deciding the issue from the destination alone. Can a parent refuse for any reason? Suppose Dad's explanation is this: "Sophie went abroad with you last year. I think it's my turn to take her away." That might be relevant when the parents are dividing school holiday time, but permission to travel and the fair allocation of parenting time aren't precisely the same question. Another parent doesn't have an unrestricted veto simply because they dislike Mum's new partner, the hotel, the destination, or the possibility that Sophie might have a nice time. Equally, Mum shouldn't dismiss genuine concerns merely by saying, "You're being controlling." The sensible approach is to identify the concern and whether it can be addressed. Possible measures might include fuller travel details, confirmed return flights, video calls, replacement parenting time, travel insurance information, additional emergency contacts, or formal undertakings where appropriate. What happens if they can't agree? Where permission is legally required and agreement can't be reached, Mum may apply for a specific issue order under Section 8 of the Children Act 1989. A specific issue order allows the family court to decide a particular disputed issue concerning a child. The application is ordinarily made on Form C100. Before most Section 8 applications, the applicant must attend a mediation information and assessment meeting known as a MIAM, unless a valid exemption or another specified exception applies. The C100 asks the applicant to confirm MIAM attendance or identify the exemption relied upon. A MIAM isn't necessarily a joint mediation session. It's an initial meeting with an authorised mediator to receive information about mediation and other forms of non-court dispute resolution. But don't leave all this until the final week before the flight. The family court isn't an emergency holiday booking department. Where there's genuine urgency, the court can consider an urgent application, but there's a difference between a genuine emergency and urgency created because somebody waited until the suitcases were packed. If Mum applies, she needs to present a coherent proposal. Not "Spain, 7 days, it'll probably be fine." The court may need exact travel dates, flight numbers, other transport information, accommodation details, the name of the other travellers, emergency contact details, arrangements for Sophie to communicate with Dad, proposals concerning any affected parenting time, the purpose of the journey, and evidence concerning the return plan where that's disputed. If Dad alleges that Sophie won't be returned, he should identify the factual basis for that concern. The court may be concerned by a parent who presents a genuine risk of retaining the child abroad. It may also be concerned where a parent uses consent merely to obstruct an ordinary holiday or exercise control over the other parent. The court will assess the individual child's welfare and the evidence before it. This is the point people shouldn't dismiss. Under Section 1 of the Child Abduction Act 1984, a person connected with a child under 16 may commit an offence if they take or send that child out of the United Kingdom without the appropriate consent, subject to the Act's exceptions and defences. This doesn't mean every disagreement about a 7-night holiday leads to somebody being prosecuted. It means the issue shouldn't be treated casually. And this argument won't necessarily assist. But nobody stopped us at the airport. This is mentioned an awful lot on my Facebook group. And it's not really very helpful because just because you weren't stopped doesn't mean that somebody else won't be stopped. it's better to be prepared and have all of the paperwork in place. Passing through the airport without being questioned, it doesn't prove that the removal was legally authorised either. What documents should you carry? Even where you're legally entitled to travel, you may be asked questions by officials in the UK or overseas. That becomes more likely where your surname differs from Sophie's. Sophie travels with only one parent, she travels with a grandparent or another adult, or the journey involves several countries. Government guidance says a traveller may be asked for a permission letter and evidence of their relationship with the child. Relevant documents may include a birth or adoption certificate and, where surnames differ, marriage or divorce documentation. Consider carrying Sophie's passport, your own passport, a copy of her birth or adoption certificate, the written consent, Dad's contact details, a copy of the relevant child arrangements order, evidence explaining any different surnames, return flight details, accommodation details, travel insurance and necessary medical documentation. 17 snacks Sophie has specifically requested. And one completely different snack she'll demand 4 minutes after takeoff. What about grandparents and new partners? Suppose Sophie travels with grandma instead of mum. Grandma doesn't automatically gain legal authority to take Sophie abroad because everyone describes her as the sensible one. She should carry clear written permission from those whose consent is required, proper travel information and evidence of a relationship with Sophie where that's available. The same issue may arise where a child travels with a step-parent, an older sibling, a family friend or an organised group. Good intentions don't replace legal authority. What if you fear the child won't return? Now, reverse the situation. Dad discovers that mum has booked tickets. He has evidence suggesting that she intends to remain overseas permanently with Sophie. This isn't the moment for a sequence of increasingly angry emojis. Dad should obtain urgent specialist legal advice. Depending on the circumstances, possibly protective steps could include an urgent prohibited steps order, passport-related directions, a child arrangements order, wardship or other protective orders. Where there's an imminent and credible risk of a child being taken abroad without consent, urgent action may be required, including contacting the police where appropriate. That's different from an ordinary argument about dates, accommodation, or a missed weekend. Don't describe every holiday disagreement as attempted abduction, but don't ignore concrete evidence of a genuine non-return risk. So let's return to Sophie. Dad's objection isn't actually that mum will keep Sophie abroad. He's concerned because the holiday removes one of his weekends, and because mum booked it before discussing the dates with him. Mum offers the full itinerary, confirmed return flight details, an additional weekend before the trip, an extra overnight after Sophie returns, and reasonable telephone contact during the holiday. Dad agrees. They record the consent clearly in writing. Mum carries the consent letter, Sophie's birth certificate, and a copy of the child arrangements order. Sophie goes to Spain, and she returns safely. And despite her earlier confidence, she's still unable to speak fluent Spanish. Before you book or travel, ask yourself, who has parental responsibility? Do I legally require their consent? Is there a child arrangements order? Does the order say that the child lives with me? Does any part of the order restrict travel? Will the trip interfere with ordered parenting time? Have I provided reasonable travel information? Is the consent clear and in writing? Do I have the appropriate documents? And have I left enough time to resolve any dispute? The worst time to investigate this is at the airport, standing beside 2 suitcases, 3 boarding passes and a child asking whether the plane will wait. It won't. Have you ever experienced difficulty agreeing on a holiday abroad? Perhaps permission was refused, messages were ignored, or nobody understood what the existing child arrangements order actually allowed. Let me know in the comments, but importantly, don't include names, identifying details, or confidential information from court proceedings. And which factual family law video should I cover next? A. What parental responsibility actually means. B. What happens at an FHDRA. C. How CAFCAS becomes involved. D. What happens when a child arrangement stops working. Please like this video if it helped, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next Family Court Explained video or fictionalised You Be the Judge scenario. For individual assistance, the first point of contact is info@firstfamilylaw.co.uk if you would like personalised professional help from me and my team. I'm Neil Andrews and I'll see you in the next video.